We are in the midst of a
Damn, we really done for 90s?
The age-old debate of past versus present has reached critical mass, and sides have been taken. A revolution is taking place, and we're losing good men. Old school versus
back in my
school.
heyday.
Back in the day versus modern
Back in
day.
my heyday.
A story as old as
no blood,
time
no foul,
itself.
young blood.
I tried to ignore this bloodbath, but just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, it all got so much worse.
We done with the 90s.
Film of NBA games from the 80s and 90s coming to light, showing that the good old days were in fact not that good. This whole time, the punishing defensive legend was actually just a bunch of plumbers camping out in the paint looking for someone to hack. Shots clanking off the backboard, players running around aimlessly,
running around doing nothing.
And worst of all,
cardio.
Michael Jeffrey Jordan,
no
the
left hand,
greatest
Jaylen Brown
player of all time, didn't even have a left hand. What is going on? Have we been lied to about basketball in the 80s and 90s?
Nah, I think it's just clips. I think it's just clips and then just like TikTok clips.
Are we really done with that era of hoops? Or are we being deceived by lowlights, misinformation, and cherry-picked clips?
Because in like 2040, I think they're gonna put like 2020 clips where LeBron played against like podcasters.
I think I've got an answer.
Streamers.
And some of y'all ain't gonna like it.
I guess it had coming.
Hitting analysis, testimonies from past and present players talking about their experience in the league and how it's changed over the years. And none of those things managed to do what these 5 simple words have done in just a week.
We done for 90s.
Soon enough,
bro, the game changed so much. The game really changed so much because the spacing. The spacing in today's game is so different from back in the 90s.
Rolling in of players from that era,
you can't, like, I know people say that. I know like people say that today's game can't nobody defends because the spacing and they got rid of hand checking.
Long-winded take on this whole discussion.
Yeah, this video is 25 minutes long.
I want to begin by saying what this discourse has taught me more than anything else is that NBA fans today never actually took the time to go back and watch games of the past. Brothers, I have been harping on this for years, begging for fans of the game, whether you are new or have been watching for years, to just go back and watch full games. Not highlights, not clips, full-length games of eras from the past. And after seeing this discussion devolve into where it is today, it is clear to me that most people never take the time. I'm seeing countless fans have this sort of awakening as they're watching films of these old games as if the footage was buried or lost, and it's finally being unearthed for the world to see. It's been right here on YouTube for the past 15 years. You mean to tell me the same fans who chime in with
the game is way different. The paint's always packed. We've watched back in the 90s basketball.
On the always packed. Never spared the time to even watch the games they were referring to. I guess that does explain a lot. Now, I'd like to think I'm somewhere in the middle on this whole discussion. I have said on multiple occasions that players in today's NBA are simply more skilled than players of the past, which has resulted in bigger stat lines and higher point totals than ever before. It's not the defense that has gotten worse, it's the offense that has gotten better. You know, that whole shit. Yeah. But I also have an appreciation for the greats that came before.
Offense got way better, so the defense didn't really get worse.
I almost feel like I'm hallucinating seeing this 90s basketball slander campaign unfold in front of my eyes. It feels like everyone's perception on the age-old debate changed literally overnight. I know that's not the case, but after seeing all of this play out, it sure feels that way. But today, I'm not just going to show you some cherry-picked clips or unhinge this narrative even further. I'm going to show you real film, real data, and proof of how we might actually be done with the 80s and 90s. And of course, if Michael Jordan really had no left hand. Spoiler, he did. Now, I have been an advocate for the modern players are better than players of the past movement for quite some time now. In fact, as crazy as it is for younger fans to say Michael Jordan was trash, it's just as absurd for older fans to say the game hasn't evolved and gotten better over the last 30 years. Because that's all this debate really is. Young fans versus old fans, or...
That's true. I think in like 2040, the players in the future, like 2040, they're gonna look back at 2020. 2020 is like, oh, why didn't they do this? Like
fans
you're just nitpicking.
This versus fans that are watching
you're gonna look back and then like,
objectively, players today are much better than
why
they were in the 80s
did players
and
back then do this?
Specifically, the lower end of the talent pool in the NBA today is vastly better than it was in the past. I think great players would be great in any era, but with the spacing, the shot making, the emphasis on offense as opposed to defense has made the depth across the NBA today just way ahead of where it was in the 80s and the 90s. There was, without exaggeration, guys in the NBA throughout the 80s and 90s that were on NBA rosters just to accumulate fouls and sit in the paint.
Nah, it's not the old heads, because I remember there's clips of Will Chamberlain hating on like the 80s players. And he wasn't hating on Michael Jordan. He was like saying Michael Jordan's not the best player. I don't think he would be able to play in the 60s.
These players were offensively inept, and that was okay because their role was not to create offense. But in today's NBA, where offense reigns supreme, there is no room for these players. Now, you could and should go
back in the 2000s, so many like unskilled big men that were just signed by teams to guard Shaq.
watch film of games, not highlights, from this era and see just how limited the skill sets of some of these players were. The shot making, for the most part, was limited to set jumpers, slashers coming downhill for layups, and big men trying to muscle their way to a bucket down low in the midst of what appears to be a wrestling match. Catch a player off guard with a double team, and they immediately pick up their dribble. Simple things like guards turning their back to the basket 20 feet out instead of creating space off dribble. Even players looking down at the ball while trying to get out on a fast break was very common in this era. And these aren't lowlights or cherry-picked incidences. This is just what the game looked like 35 years ago. But even without film, nearly every metric suggests modern players are more capable of players in the past. Free throw percentage was worse, three-point percentage was worse, turnover percentage was higher. They used to shoot more free throws, but still ended up with far less points. Now, this is not to say that this era of hoops was trash. That's just disingenuous and flat out wrong. These were the best players in the world at the time. It was just simply not as good as what it is today.
recently said that when he came to the league, he watched Russell, Kareem, and Wilt footage, and even he thought they were not impressive.
Yeah.
Now, despite this being a very relevant topic for years, the idea of rule changes and how these changes have affected the game still remain a mystery to some. Players were a product of their era and the rules of their era. The first step to discovering greats of the past is to watch film of them play. The next step is to gather and understand the context of the film you are watching. When you see a 6'9" Magic Johnson go flying down the court with what looks like kind of a stiff dribble, you may think the man has no bag. But my friends, Magic Johnson did have a bag.
Bro. He could pass, man.
Rules in place at the time only allowed him to reach so far into it before he got called for every violation in the rulebook. Consider the fact that any move where your hand wasn't completely on top of the basketball was considered a carry. No zero steps, no gather steps. You get
back then,
and anything more was called a travel.
No gather, no euro,
no lunging into players to draw easy fouls. Here's a clip of Danny Ainge hitting Kevin McHale with a hezzy in the mid-80s. And the man thinks he just witnessed witchcraft.
But when practice sessions were completed, some of the most competitive competition began.
Here's some more clips of players getting called for travels and carries doing moves that are very typical and allowed in 2024. 90% of the moves you see today, the very method most players generate their offense would be called for some sort of violation 40 or 30 or even 20 years ago. And this isn't just some cop-out or excuse as to why these players of the past weren't doing this stuff. The rule changes are real, documented pieces of NBA history. You can literally look them up. The game got looser, players grew up and shaped their game around these looser rules, and now they have free reign to let their basketball run wild.
What got looser?
That's kind of the point. Players of the past didn't grow up practicing 25-footers. They didn't work on a dozen moves to create separation. They played in offensive systems that focused on the team, the collective, schemes and sets that resembled something closer to college basketball, where ISO possessions were few and far in between, so they never developed an arsenal to counter these situations. The rules of the time limited their game, which resulted in them having a more limited skill set than players today. If Larry Bird grew up with a three-point line, he might have been the greatest long-range shooter ever. But he didn't, and as a result, he didn't shoot a lot of threes, and he wasn't as efficient.
I saw a post where Draymond had more career threes than Larry Bird. I mean, it makes sense because Larry back in the 70s didn't really shoot threes.
As the best shooters today, we can sit here and assume these players of the past might be as capable as players today if they were playing under the same rules and conditions, but they didn't, and I don't think we should assume that. The fact
remember when it said that if you transport a team from the 90s in today's game, I think they'll get blown out by like some. It's like Indiana Pacers would. I think the Indiana Pacers would beat the Bulls. I think like Dallas Mavericks would beat the Bulls. The 95 Bulls.
Hasn't Draymond played more games,
but that's not to say the game was trash back then, or that the superstars
I don't
of these
remember.
eras couldn't compete in
I'm sure he has, but I don't know the style off the top of my head. But yeah, I think like Dallas Mavericks would beat the 95 Bulls. If you like literally teleported, if you literally just teleported them in today's game, and then they have no knowledge of anything, it's like literally just transport them and then just play ball. I think the spacing would destroy everybody. They'd be so confused what to do.
If my math is correct.
Not spacing, but like,
a very long time ago. In 1985,
I think they just lose
won an NBA title,
to the Mavericks.
Won the league MVP, and Michael Jordan.
The offensive rating from the Mavs compared to the Bulls. Oh, I never forget this one.
What about the other way around?
Years ago from today.
I think it was so dominating. The rules are. I mean, there's hand checking. There's hand checking. You space the floor out.
Time that is passed.
You play 5-out offense.
From that 1985 season to the year the NBA was founded in 1946. Look at these clips. Do you think these players could compete with the likes of Bird, Magic, and Jordan? Let me answer that for you. No. But take the best players of the 80s and 90s, and could they compete in today's league? Absolutely. Give these guys some credit. Watching this today is the equivalent of watching this in the 80s, and yet this product is vastly closer to the basketball we see today than this product was to what fans were witnessing in the 80s. In fact, we can use different superstars as sort of a cross-generational measuring stick to see just how stiff the competition has been over the years. Larry and Magic played Michael, who played Kobe, who played LeBron, who has played the players of today. And nowhere down this timeline was there any real jump or fall off in production or level of competition from one era to the next. Each era had their stars. Those stars crossed paths with stars of other eras, and no one era was clear-cut ahead of the other. If the 80s were so bad, then why did players...
Oh, yeah, another thing, you know how Luka... Luka said that the EuroLeague is harder to score than the NBA? It's because of they allow zone defense as well.
players of the 90s have to wait for those guys to get old and retire.
Imagine having like Wemby or Rudy Gobert camping in the paint
To have a shot at winning. And if the 90s were so bad, then why did players of the 2000s not win until those guys retired? We don't need to assume that adjacent eras could compete with one another because we actually saw it. MJ struggled with some of the guys that came before him, Shaq struggled against Hakeem, and Kobe struggled against MJ, LeBron struggled against guys like Duncan and Dirk, and players of today have struggled to get past some of the older players in the league who are a product of the previous era. Now, what we shouldn't do is jump 3 or 4 eras at a time, ignoring entire decades of evolution and saying the game back then was better or even as good as it is today. At a certain point, the knowledge and wisdom that comes from actually witnessing decades of NBA history, like some older fans have, becomes skewed and watered down by nostalgia and a generational bias. Superstars are superstars because their game transcends the era they played in, but they also played in an inferior league.
Man, Jahlil Okafor would have been so good in the 90s. Jahlil Okafor. I was always so high on Jahlil Okafor when he came out of Duke. Man, and then I was so wrong about him.
And although generational talents of the past would do just fine today, this same logic does not apply to the vast majority of the league throughout the 80s and 90s.
It is inevitable though. Players get better over time.
It's because of knowledge. It's because of knowledge, not because of like, and skill base as well. It's like, you know what's a good shot, and like, I just remember back then, like long time ago, yeah, people was like, just, I remember back then, Charles Barkley was like, live by a 3, die by a 3, and then they like, you can never, I remember that Charles Barkley was talking about the Suns, they can never win a championship because it shoots too many threes, and then now today's game, everybody shoots threes.
And the 90s were inferior as well. When did the NBA become?
I don't remember. It's like mid 2000s.
Ironically,
when the Suns were good with Steve Nash.
Skill set of players before Michael Jordan hit his peak and after. For example, the early 90s and late 90s, although being in the same decade, were massively different in play style and skill set. Think for a second about the fact that Magic Johnson was still in his prime in the early 90s, and Allen Iverson was entering his prime in the late 90s. In less than 10 years, basketball became a massively different game. By the late 90s, the players who grew up watching Jordan fly through the air and slice up defenses were in the league and were reshaping the role that perimeter players played. Guys like Kobe Bryant, Allen Iverson, Ray Allen, Stephon Marbury, Grant.
Okay, a better example is think about the 80s dunk contest. Like the stuff that Jaylen Brown did in this year's dunk contest is the stuff that the guys did in the 80s dunk contest. And then think about how people were so impressed with the guys in 80s dunk contests we're doing, and then imagine how people reacted to Jaylen Brown's dunks
around the same time, and were
this year
of what they saw MJ do throughout his career. Players with a skill set that more closely resembles what we see today than it did to the skill sets of players of the 80s and even early 90s. This is where I think most fans might make the distinction of when the league really took a leap, not in competitiveness, but rather play style. You can go back and watch these guys play, and it's not too different.
Yeah, play style is way different.
Game today.
It's way different.
To the shift in play style that happened in the late 2010s after Steph Curry redefined what makes a great championship caliber player, and the league
I think the Rockets and Warriors redefined everything. It's not just Warriors, because Daryl Morey,
this new three-point heavy,
the Rockets shot so many threes.
The kids who watched what Steph was doing in the mid-2010s emulated that style of play, tailored their games to it, and are now in the league doing things that only Steph could do a decade ago. So if we're done with the 80s and 90s, where can we look back and no longer apply this era tax on these players?
Can't forget how good the nutrition and medicine is now. You can somewhat come back from a career-ending injury. Well, at least come back 50%. Back then, if you had a career-ending injury, you were done for. You were cooked.
Yeah. I remember KD. I remember KD was like one of the only person. I think Dominique Wilkins as well. Dominique Wilkins and KD, like KD came back from the Achilles injury as well. But usually most Achilles injuries is like career ruining. Is what I remember hearing.
NBA fans claim our favorite players, the guys we grew up watching, are not as good as the players of the future. What will you have to say? Right now, there is no one in the world who can shoot like Steph Curry. But inevitably, there will be. And eventually, there will be many players who can shoot like him. His records will fall, his percentages won't look as good through the lens of 2040, and although his legacy will be cemented, his actual game will be put into question. And based on the arguments I'm hearing today on why past players were trash, we will have nothing to say that will change their minds. We know that Curry was the first to do what he's doing. He is a pioneer of the modern NBA. We have context to back up our claims. But if we aren't willing to hear older fans out today, what makes us think younger fans will hear us out in the future? Mark my words. There will be a day when young fans will go back, watch film of LeBron,
isn't the leg injury Paul George got usually a career-ending injury or not?
Fans saying he has no
injury.
Back. Younger players
I don't know. I don't remember any other previous. Sean Livingston? I don't remember any players from like 80s getting any kind of injury like that.
He ever did.
Off the top of my head.
A bit deeper with games that look more polished. It's all fun and games now to crack jokes about past eras, but our day will come too, and it ain't gonna be pretty. But
yeah,
Giannis could only run and dunk. Your era was
run and dunk. Listen to new skills, buddy.
Off the ground, running the whole league. You can scramble to pull up clips and show the numbers, but their minds will already be made up. This is why I think it is so important to have genuine, thought-out discourse about the game if you're truly a fan of it. But To all of the older fans out there, you kinda started this whole thing. For years, we heard y'all badmouth modern players, saying the league is soft, players today couldn't compete back then. Back in my day, real men played the game. Y'all cannot be mad that some fans are done with the 80s and 90s when y'all never even gave modern basketball a chance. Sure, a lot of fans never took the time to go back and watch the greats of the past, but let's be honest for a second. Older fans don't watch games today. They catch a stray clip on Facebook of LeBron flopping and like an echo.
Facebook? Modern fans Facebook?
Chamber of disgruntled old men. They just start firing away in the comments, agreeing with one another.
Now that I think about it, the 80s players were super durable, but they stayed in the paint. Now you have to run out to the perimeter.
And say they were incredible, while also acknowledging that that version of the NBA as a whole was not as refined or as good as it is today. Now, will I be able to make that distinction in 20 years when some snot-nosed brat?
Bro, back then, I think, bro, those guys played like 40 minutes a game, man. Every single player played like 40 minutes a game until like the late 2010s.
Glorious King was trash? I'm not so sure.
No, he had it left. I'm sure there's clips.
I'm sure there's clips throughout these games. Charted when he went to his right, when he went to his left, and what those possessions resulted in.
Because you can find clips of anything.
Jordan made a move with his left hand or his right hand.
Didn't Will basically play the whole game
LMAO? Yeah, he did.
Right hand, and 106 of them were with his left hand. Of the
I'm saying it's clips, man. You can really find clips of anything, like LeBron being bad at something, man.
Moves resulted in a shot in which he made 63% of them, and only
Curry being bad at threes. You just pull up a game where he's
resulted in a pass or him getting fouled 45 times, while 55 of these left-handed moves ended up in a shot in which he made 51%, and 6 moves resulted in a turnover. So based on this data, Jordan was definitely more comfortable going right, especially near the rim and even on mid-range jumpers. He struggled a bit in comparison to his right whenever he pulled up off of a left-handed dribble. But overall, Jordan went to his left 47% of the time, and although it was his weaker hand, he was still above league average even while going to his left.
I could easily say LeBron is bad at defense if I cherry-picked
a relatively
clips.
Small sample size.
Yeah, of course.
So I looked into it further and found this. A detailed breakdown of Michael Jordan's shot chart and shot tendencies in 3 seasons from 1990 to 1992. 126 games and over 4,800 minutes in total, tracking exactly what Michael did on the court for 3 seasons. And here's what the data shows. In total, Michael made 1,074 moves in isolation, going either to his right or to his left hand. 48% of those moves were with his right hand, and 52% of those moves were with his left hand. When going to the right, Michael shot 61.7% on 410 shots with 15 turnovers, resulting in 1.38 points per possession. When going to his left, Michael shot 61.3% on 421 shots with 36 turnovers, resulting in 1.31 points per possession. So even with a much larger sample size, Michael not only had a left hand, he went to it just as often as he went to his right, and was nearly as proficient with his left as he was with his right. Now for some context, throughout this 3-year span, Michael made on average 4.4 left-handed isolation moves, or in this case, isolation possessions, that resulted in 1.31 points per possession. Now here are some prolific scores from this season and their overall tendencies and efficiency in isolation. Keep in mind, this data includes both right-handed and left-handed moves from these players. And now here is
James Harden's right here.
Michael Jordan with just his left hand. So yeah, I'd say contrary to what is now.
We done with 2020s.